on the time.
Okay, we should be recording now.
Awesome. Okay. If you'll state your name, your major, and your year and where you're from, that'd be awesome.
Sure. My name's Adam Fonacier. I'm a senior in music media production, and I am from Pendleton, Indiana.
Nice. What inspired you to sign up for this class?
Um, yeah. So just thinking back to when I registered. I think, uh, I think it's like my answer would be similar to a lot of people who are in the class. It's just um, the topic of anti-racism is very relevant now, just with all the violence going on in response to the events surrounding George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. Um, Racial tensions are at an all-time high right now, and the question about race and how it's kind of affecting our daily lives is very much front and center in modern day politics, in discussions with our peers. So I was hoping by taking this class, it would give me, I guess, a more informed set of tools to use in these discussions. And uh, yeah, I've gotten just that, and I'm glad to have taken the class. I'm also really glad that um, we were provided with the books that he put down, really cool books that uh, this course had us read. Um, so yeah, that's I guess that's the main reason why I registered for this particular honors 199.
Yeah. I know you mentioned modern day politics in your answer and how that really impacted you taking this class. Like what in what ways do you think that's impacted the rioting and the protests that have happened in 2020?
Yeah. So people are just uh, people are just angry and unhappy with the current state of affairs, and just the fact that there hasn't been a lot of change. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think has sort of contributed to the fact that people are just like things are coming to a boiling point right now, and people are tired of not seeing any change going on. Um, and so I think it was Dr. Martin Luther King who said that uh, writing is the language of the unheard or the unlistened to, and that's kind of what we're seeing now. People are, or not as much now, but back when things were bad, you saw almost every major city in America. You saw people uh, busting windows, doing vandalism on storefronts, and um, these people are just mad, and they want to see change happen on a systematic level because all of this stuff it's part of a system that's been, I mean, like, as we've learned, it's part of a system that's developed and sort of become entrenched in the way we live ever since the beginning of our country. Um, so people are tired of this, and they want to see change, and I can relate to that to a certain degree. I think part of part of the violence and just the outrage could be, I don't know if you've seen the Social Dilemma, but they talk. It's like this documentary where they talk about how social media has kind of morphed into this big part of our lives that we interact with every day, and they talk about how just as a result of the algorithms that we interact with, how those sort of play a role in to how polarized we're becoming as a society. Like if you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, depending on what you search in Google, you'll get specific results depending on, I guess, what your interests are or what your data says about you. And just the fact that everyone's like kind of spoon fed customized information, um, like if you search climate change is on Google, you'll get different results based off of where you are, and you'll have different posts that you see on your newsfeed on Instagram or Facebook. And so people can live their entire lives thinking that, oh, what I'm seeing in the news that I see, oh, that's normal. Like that's the accepted standard for like what's going on. When in reality, that's not always the case. Just as a result of the information you're being fed. Um, yeah,
Those are
I
really
don't
good
know if that
points.
answers your question. That went down
No, that was
a
a great
rabbit hole.
answer. That made a lot of sense. I like the spoon fed metaphor. It really does feel like we're just kind of flying blind. So that was really a good answer. How has this class specifically surprised you, and like from what you expected when you signed up for the class initially?
Um, I think one aspect of the class that surprised me, or I guess there was one like concept that I encountered when reading the How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi. There was there was this one concept that just resonated with me and has kind of stuck with me as we go through the class. It was the fact that discrimination, it does not always have like a racist basis. Um, like there's racist discrimination where like you suppress someone based on the color of their skin or their racial group or identity, and then there's anti-racist discrimination. And I'm like, wait, what? Isn't all discrimination racist? Which is what racist power would have us think, according to Kendi. The racist power in place has kind of hijacked discrimination to call basically any form of discrimination racist, when in reality that's not always the case. Um, like I think about, and it's like a complex concept, but something that kind of helped me think about it is if you think about like racial inequity as like a scale, like a multi-dimensional scale, like there's multiple scales on, I guess, surrounding all sides. You could see like the scale kind of growing imbalanced as history continues to unfold, because like obviously certain racial groups are set up at an advantage and other marginalized racial groups are set up for a disadvantage. And so throughout history, we see this scale kind of starting to tilt out of balance. So in my mind, and according to Kendi, like the only logical action would be to sort of reverse that effect. And the only way to do that is through like reverse discrimination in a certain way, like showing, giving priority to certain disadvantaged groups, since the racist policies in place were kind of set up to benefit the privileged groups. You kind of have
Yeah.
to reverse that with, be it through anti-racist legislation or I guess anti-racist policies in general, just to rebalance the scales. You kind of have to meet it with the same customized force, if that makes sense.
Right, which I guess is kind of where modern day politics sort of full circles it, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like ties back in. Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. That's great. How did you interact with race as a child, and how did that change as you got older?
Man, good question. I grew up in a predominantly white high school, small town. Not necessarily a sundown town. Like it's it's not a town where like you'd feel scared walking around as a person of color. Um, but I don't know. I grew up, in terms of race, I feel like I grew up in a mm, I grew up in a town and a school where discussions weren't necessarily like put into place about race. Um, Obviously, people had like their own ideas and had their own like kind of distasteful sense of humor. I feel like you get that in any like predominantly white high school, just because people grow up with other like a majority of other people that they share a background and appearance with, and so they don't necessarily um, have the opportunity to interact with people that are different from them, if that makes sense. And so as a result, I think I grew up. I don't want to call it a wasteland, but like sort of a place that was devoid of uh, those conversations and opportunities to sort of grow my knowledge. Um, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. Just because there wasn't really a lot for me to work with besides obviously um, info that was available on social media. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, sorry I couldn't give a more detailed answer.
No, you're good. Like what about even like when you were younger, like super little? Was that a conversation that like you had with your parents, or was that like a like just common knowledge, like there is racism,
It was not
or not
actually.
really?
I honestly cannot remember a conversation that I had. Um, oh my goodness. There was this there was this one time and I literally just thought of this. There was this one time um, in middle school, I think it was, we had like our generation had just discovered Instagram, and like I I had it on like an iPod Touch, I think, back in the
Yes,
day.
iPod
Um,
Touch.
yeah, the iPod Touch, you know. Um, yeah, I had Instagram, and so this was kind of like the first time that I was interacting with people my age, like
Mm.
so easily on a almost on a daily basis. This app is so cool, and so I think middle school was a super interesting time for us to be like exposed to tools like that because we were
Mm.
kind of like presented with this opportunity to create like this digital presence for ourselves, and we were like, okay, we were trying different things out and trying to see what people responded positively to and what like didn't work necessarily. And so um, there was this one instance where I had gotten into a conversation with like this one guy just like in the comment sections of one of my posts, and like uh, he was a white dude and he ended up using the N word, and I was ooh, I like didn't know what to do with that information. As a middle school kid, I didn't know what to think about it. Um, I wasn't necessarily like taken aback because it wasn't something that I was used to seeing. It
Mm.
wasn't something I didn't know how wrong that was at the time. And so uh, I was I was lucky enough to I guess have parents that like gave a shit about what I was seeing on social media, and
Yeah.
they would sort of like uh, look after what was going on my feed, and so they saw
That's
that,
good.
and that was an instance that I remember that my mom in particular said, okay, so you have to you have to like delete that comment because it is not okay for you to use that word, for anyone to
Mm.
use that word because um, it's based from a racist place, even though it might be a term that's kind of owned by Black America. It's been sort of used as a endearing term lately. It's not really for anyone else to like use for I guess humor or for any other sort of purpose. So um, that's the only conversation um, that I guess was close to um, a racial discussion from my childhood.
Is that kind of when you first were introduced to even the concept of racism?
I think so. Um, well, I mean, growing up, even in elementary school, I don't know if it was elementary school, but I feel like everyone kind of learned at some point about slavery, and so
Mm.
um,
That's true.
learning about slavery in elementary school, I think that um, that introduced me to racism. But I think similar to a lot of other people, um, like as a kid, I was convinced that after the Civil War, all racism was solved. Like, oh, there's no more racism. It's fine. Um, but obviously, that's not the case. Like, there's still like deeply rooted systems that probably have uh, been yet to be solved and reversed. But yeah, that's my experience as a kid. Yeah, sorry that was kind of scatterbrain across the
No, this
board.
is good. I know you like talked about like the racist humor that people used a lot, and like kind of how that was your segue into like deeper racism. Like, what at what point do you think that those jokes and that those comments stop being funny, like, and start being offensive? You know what I mean?
Man, that's that's a tough question because it's not like the truthful answer is something that like I'm kind of regretful about, but I would say that um, these like it all stopped being funny freshman year of college. I would say I knew it was wrong to a certain extent in high school, but I was never really in a position to where I felt inclined to like call people out and say, "Hey, that's not right. This is wrong. You can't really say that word." Um, because I
Yeah.
um, I did cross country in high school, and I was I, I was the only I was the only minority person of color that was a part of that team, and um, I love my teammates to death, but and they would look back at this now with a similar perspective. I would think, or I would hope, but man, just like some of the jokes that were made, um, just the use the use of the N word every now and then, man, it's really embarrassing and really unfortunate to look back at, but that was I wouldn't say like um, I wouldn't say like part of daily humor and daily conversation, but it was kind of like the edge, like the point that people would often step over, um, and
Yeah.
yeah, at that point in my life, I'd say that like I knew that it was wrong and I knew that it was racist and kind of like regressive in terms of how things
Mm.
have progressed in recent years, but uh, I didn't start to take a critical look at it until freshman year of college because that's when I started being exposed to um, different ideas and different conversations, particularly through um, the Asian American Student Association and through classes like these. That was when I first started to take this seriously, I would say.
Yeah, that kind of segues actually pretty nicely into my next question, which was like, how have you witnessed or experienced racism in your life? And you talked about like the cross country team. And like, did you feel like offended by that at the time, or was it only after the fact that kind of like you realized like, oh shoot, they're being mean, you know, unkind?
It was very much after the fact. Yeah, I was
Mm.
I was pretty dumb in high school, and I kind of, uh, along with a lot of people, I kind of like went with the flow with a lot of things, and I guess sort of changed. I was the type of person that hung out around like a bunch of different circles. Like I had the cross country people. I did theater at one point. I was friends with some show choir kids. Um, there was there was some film movie nerds that I hung out with, and yeah, I kind of like changed my demeanor, like shifting between those couple of groups, and um, as far as how much racism I experienced, I definitely felt like I was, I guess, looked at differently from my other friends. Um, whenever whenever race was brought up, I did feel like people would sort of like subtly like look my way and uh, subconsciously kind of like seeking out my opinion as a person of color. Um, but interestingly enough, I don't think I've ever experienced like blatant racism, like walking into a store and having someone look at me weird. Um, and I think, and this is, I think it's unfortunate, but I think that's a result of, I guess, me sort of being of a lighter skin tone and lighter complexion. Um, we just finished reading a chapter on color in Kendi's book, and he sort of touched on the fact that in America, like lightness has kind of formed its own space of privilege, in that like white people are white people, not all white people, but white folks will, I guess, like seek to alter their perform or alter their appearance to appear, um, more, I guess, raced or more like darker in complexity, just out of like some weird idea of or weird fetishized idea of like, oh, like being darker is like exotic and attractive and interesting, whereas like on the flip side, um, darker skinned people, will, I guess, seek out ways to like appear lighter in complexion. Um, and so yeah, I'm definitely privileged in that like society has sort of evolved in a way that's like, oh, he's light skinned and he's like, I guess, similar to white folks. And yeah, I don't know. It's that's been my experience with it. I feel like I'm coming from a point of privilege, and so haven't, been lucky enough not to, experience the more blatant side of racism.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic too that like I mean white people tan, you know what I mean? So they try to make themselves darker. It's just a very like there's a lot of cognitive dissonance I think to that concept.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah, you did a really great job of explaining that though. Yeah, so kind of intersectionality was another thing we really touched on this year in our honors class. And how do you interact with intersectionality? Like, do you feel like you face any intersections, or just what is that to you in your life?
So intersectionality for me, I always knew it was a term. Actually, I didn't always know. Sophomore year, I think, was when sophomore year of college was when I heard the term intersectionality for the first time, and, um, I'm still kind of wrestling with the actual definition of it, but, um, I because I feel like it's one of the most complex for me personally. I feel like it's one of the most complex topics that we've, encountered in this course, just because it's so broad and it takes into account a lot of different factors. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm sorry. What was the question again? Like how have I like?
Like how that is, what is that in your life? Kind of like, do you like, are there multiple discriminatory factors that you feel like you wrestle with, or like just have you seen in your life? You know what I mean?
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Um, Phew. Um, Intersectionality. So I see. So I definitely see sort of, like my minority or my status as a minority, as sort of like its own thing. But, I guess I guess my career choice could be, um, sort of like another like section, um, that sort of puts me in the minority. I went to like a creative field, um, choosing to major in music, so, there's definitely like a stigma with that whenever people like ask me like what I'm gonna do, um, after graduation or what I'm
What's the
studying.
stigma?
It's like people, I don't know, cause, um, I feel like there's this common like collective thing like, oh, arts majors aren't gonna make as much money, when they graduate, which is a a fair assessment, um, given like the statistics, but, um, it's like, I don't know. There's a different vibe when you ask someone like, oh, like what's your kid majoring in, and they'll say, oh, I'm going into nursing, or I'm going into education, or looking to get into law school later on in life. Um, Whereas like people kind of take on a different tone where you say, "Oh, I'm majoring in music," or "I'm studying audio engineering." They'll be like, "Oh, nice," or like, my sister's kid is going into that," and um, yeah, I don't know. It's like weird in that people kind of have like this internalized notion that since you're a music major, since like or insert X Y or Z, like you're a creative writing major, um, you're I guess like a TCOM video major. People have sort of like this
Mhm.
internalized bias, like, oh, this person this person's kind of like a cop out, like they couldn't do the harder stuff, or they're not going to make as much money as they graduate. So that's what I mean by the stigma. That might be sort of like exaggerated in my mind, um, or rooted in like a deeper insecurity. That might be the case, but it's just something I've observed. Um, so like I have that aspect of my life, which is not a big deal at all. Like I don't usually complain about it, and um, compared to racism, it's very very small and insignificant. Um, but
It does sound
that's
hurtful though. That's cool.
yeah, it's I mean yeah, it's something that you sort of kind of have to shoulder and deal with, and also just like form a security around because um, I don't know if what's your major, Olivia?
I'm majoring in speech pathology.
Speech path, right on. Um,
Thanks.
yeah, I have a friend who majors in speech path. It's really a really cool field. Are you thinking about going into audiology or?
I haven't decided yet. Right now, I'm actually double majoring in speech path and studio art. So I kind of get what you're saying with the creative arts section.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Like if
yeah,
people ask you what you major in, do you usually default towards like, oh
I
yeah, I'm a
usually
speech
just say
path
speech
major. Yeah,
pathology. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's kind of like that subconscious instinct to wanna like, I guess appear secure and appear like, um, I guess rock solid in the career path that you chose.
There
And
is a
I
certain stereotype that runs with those majors. Like I get what you're saying,
Yeah, there definitely is.
even if it's really far off.
Hmm. But yeah, I guess that's sort of like the only areas I can think of right now where I see as intersectional because I I mean, I'll be the first to admit I come from a very privileged stature, just where the class that I've been brought up in, and just the people I've grown up around. I have a super white Caucasian way of speaking, and oftentimes I get made fun of by my Filipino friends because of that. Um,
Really.
yeah, I had this one friend sophomore year. Um, he said, "Dude, you talk like a 18th century like Renaissance guy." And I'm like, "Man, what's that supposed to mean?" But um, yeah, there's not a lot of intersectionality with myself. Dr. Bartlett would probably find a bunch of um, different ways that I'm intersectional, but as I see myself right now, um, just as a privileged light skinned male, um, there's not a lot that I see. Well, I guess if you think of intersectionality as sort of like a broad, overreaching thing, like we are all intersectional, and so like the points where I guess the points where we're privileged are also intersectional. I guess so. You don't have to be a minority to be intersectional. I guess. So yeah, I'm glad that I've sort of worked that out um,
Yeah.
in my own mind. Sorry if that was a scatterbrain response.
No, it wasn't scatterbrain. It was really good. That was really, yeah. You have really interesting responses. I'm really enjoying this interview.
I'm glad.
And compared, like, relative to Muncie, you know how like the diversity wise, what is your hometown like, just comparatively?
Oh my goodness. So I grew up. I don't know. Did you grow up in Indiana, Olivia?
Yeah, I grew up in Indiana.
Right on. What part?
I'm Columbus.
Columbus. Is
It's
that
kind of by, it's like a 45 minutes from Bloomington.
okay? Right on. So like kind of southwest Indiana,
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
south of Muncie.
So I grew up in a small town um, right down I-69 if you go south. It's sort of by Anderson, but it's the small
Mm.
town, Pendleton, Indiana. Um, it's man, it's your classic small town. Like it's surrounded by farms, and there's sort of like this uh, kind of gentrified-ish like downtown center. It's like one of those old downtown things like you would think about like a classic small town. Like, oh, there's the post office. There's sort of like this town hall, and then you drive for like a quarter of a mile, and then like it's gone. Like you're in cornfields again. Um, but
Indiana.
yeah, the classic. But yeah, definitely a predominantly white um, town. Heavy, heavy in terms of like uh, Christian population. Lots of people would identify as Christian. Lots of people, the majority of people you talk to, go to a church, whether it be, I think there's like a bigger church in Anderson that they would go to, or there's this central church that a lot of people would go to called Pendleton Christian. So a lot of people like grow up in, I guess, like a similar mindset. Like there's definitely a conventional identity to associate yourself with. And I think this is common across the board for small towns. Like if you're if you're a white if you're white Christian, then like I mean like that's sort of like the recipe for success in
Mm.
small town Indiana, USA. Um, but as that compares to Muncie, I feel like the difference is I feel like it's like almost the polar opposite. Like Muncie, um, it's it's kind of more urbanized, so you do have an increase in a black demographic, um, and you have sort of like that industrial past where and Anderson is sort of similar to this. I grew up really close to Anderson, so Anderson, I guess, is more closer to compare to Muncie. Um, but in terms of like the ideas that are that sort of go around the general public, ideas and discussions that are put into place, um, yeah, like I said, there's not a lot specifically in Pendleton, Indiana. Um, there's not a lot of room for um, that those kinds of conversations. And I don't know why I thought about this now, but just to give you like a better idea of what Pendleton is like, they recently just passed like a small town ordinance outlawing like outline out like punishing any sort of possession of marijuana. And so even if like at the federal level like it's decriminalized, the small town of Pendleton will still arrest you if you have any sort of
That's pretty
marijuana on
funny.
you, um, which is like definitely I feel like a testament to like just like oh it's like a town where like it's all white police officers, all white people on the
Mm.
town council, on the school board, um, which is definitely different from Muncie. I haven't lived in Muncie as long, so I'm not as familiar with uh, the structures of power that are in place. But it seems
Mm.
like Muncie has a more diverse set of culture to draw from, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you brought up like going to church and being a Christian as kind of a factor of like living in an all white area and like just the strictness of the small town. Like what in what ways do you think that like being a Christian and going to church is like an element of privilege? And do you think that that kind of leads to racism? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Damn. Um, we took it here, which I'm glad we did. But these are the sorts of conversations that I wouldn't dream of bringing up, like growing up as a kid in Pendleton. But like, I mean, here here in college, like this age, like these conversations are sort of more commonplace and normalized, which is super cool. Um, so uh, so I never want to just diss Christianity as a whole because it's like um, it's what I was brought up upon, and I feel like there's definitely um, solid principles that are taught as a part of the faith. But I think growing up with one ideology and one like growing up around people that have a similar mindset and a similar belief system, I think is sort of dangerous. Not that
Mm-hmm.
not saying like the sets of beliefs are wrong or incorrect in any way. People can believe what they want to believe, but really just not having any sort of opportunity to question the principles that you were raised on or question things that you were taught from a young age, I think is very, very dangerous. Just because there, I mean, there's an entire outside world outside of your small town. There's an entire continent overseas where people have grown up and different ideologies have um, sort of sprouted, and um, we're not really in a place having grown up um, within a certain square mileage without venturing out, depending on who we are. We're not really in a position to sort of question the legitimacy of belief systems and cultures that have developed like an ocean across the world. And so, growing up just in a limited amount of square mileage, never venturing outside of your small town, outside of your home, um, outside of ideas, cultures, or opinions that are that would be considered like different from what you grow up with. I think um, the
Mm-hmm.
results of that can be um, can be potentially dangerous, and that's I think sort of why we see racism um, more of a problem in certain areas of the country, um, noticeably in certain areas where I guess there are more small towns where there's less room and less tolerance for those kinds of conversations to take place. So Christianity in itself, I wouldn't say is like entirely problematic, but the way I think the way America and like Western culture has sort of interacted with the church in the past has been problematic, and I think we see um, the roots or the sort of effects of that in the modern day for sure.
Which is unfortunate that that's taken that turn, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of switch topics on us a little bit here. How has your perception of race changed since the 2020 riots?
Phew. um, well, man, um, I guess you could say that the 2020 riots and like me taking this class have sort of been congruent. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
I think my perception of race, how has it changed? I think now compared to compared to before the 2020 riots. I think now I see race as more of a systematic problem. Definitely before this class and before the 2020 riots, before race was the center of, I guess, public discussion, I didn't see race as sort of like a systematic problem. I saw it as like a historic problem that had been solved in the past, and like there's just there's just like small groups of people like white supremacists or the KKK. There's only small groups on an individual basis where they make race problematic. But um, it wasn't until now that I saw it as like, oh, there's white privilege, there's microaggressions, um, there's abuse, there's racist policy. I didn't start to see that until after the riots and until we had more class discussion on those topics.
That had to be kind of a jarring eye opener
Yeah,
for 1 year. That's a lot to process.
I think it was jarring for a lot of us, and I think we're better for it, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. There's definitely improvements that are being made because of the protests. Did you participate in any protests? And if so, what was that like for you?
I did not, um, and yeah, I regret it because I have a lot of friends that did, and it's cool to sort of be. I actually haven't taken part in any sort of like political demonstration yet, um, which is something
Really?
that's definitely on my bucket list. Um, I I think the closest that I've gotten to like a form of activism is just my work with the Asian American Student Association. When the riots sort of broke out, um, AASA released a statement on our Instagram, and I sort of played a role in crafting our statement um, in support of the
What's your
Black
statement?
Lives. Yeah. What was our statement?
Yeah.
Uh, man, I'd have
Or
to,
like
cause
the gist. Or the gist,
the
if you don't
gist of
remember it
it,
word for word.
the gist of it was, I'm trying to remember, cause it was, I, I remember it was during lockdown, so, um,
Mm.
I set up a phone on a tripod and sort of, um, I wrote something out on a Google Doc, and I sent it to the executive board to sort of read over and proofread. Um, the gist of it was, and I'm gonna oversimplify this 100%, but the gist of it pretty much was, this sucks. This is not okay. This is built on this is built on systemic racism. And it was basically us sort of reaching out and linking arms towards BSA, ASA, and
Mm.
other black student organizations on campus, and saying, um, and this was the most important part of the statement itself. I made sure to say, um, we. What did I say? It was the most important part of the statement. It said, of course I forget it now, but it was the last thing that I said on the statement, and it said, yes, this crap. I'm mad. Um, I said, we we stand with you. We raise our fists alongside you. We understand that we will never understand, but we
Mm.
will stand with you. Um, I think that's, even though it's sort of a cliche phrase that sort of went viral on social media, like it's like kind of like that typical quote that you would repost. I think it's, I think it's, I think it's a true one of the few true um, things that on the surface level, like I mean, that's a truth. Like we we have to understand that we will never understand, because um, for me, as someone from a lighter complexion, or from you as a white individual, will never understand um, the oppression that darker skinned people go through on a daily basis. We'll never have, or to a certain extent, we'll never have to experience discrimination from law enforcement. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a point, a very important point, and a very important takeaway that people should um, take from these developments, from these riots. That we have to understand that we'll never understand, but we have to, as a result, we have to put um, put marginalized folks in a position of power. We have to center their voices and um, make sure that they're heard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really great. I love your addition to that motto or the slogan. That was really impactful. Yeah, how do you think Ball State does in addressing race issues and cultivating climates of diversity? Like this institution.
So, um, yeah, Ball State is very much a predominantly white institution, founded by the Ball brothers, which is basically white privilege at its finest. I, I mean, we both read the article basically stating how like the Ball brothers pretty much like basked in their privilege and like got the super nice gentrified homes um, at Minnetristo away from sort of like the black communities, and campus sort of served as a buffer between the city and between the more valuable uh, white property. Um, so yeah, Ball State. I would say Ball State, and I think this is true across the board for the majority of predominantly white institutions. I would say, in terms of race, um, campus is more reactive than proactive. Like, I mean, as Dr. Bartlett talks about, like a racist incident happens, then there's this cycle of like the student organizations sort of taking up arms and raising the alarm, and then there's um there's sort of like this typical cycle of, oh, the administration like um, puts into place like events and student conversations just to show that they care and that they're listening to students. But it's the same thing that always happens. Like it's like with the Trump caravan, like nothing was really done about that until like BSA and the Big Four, I think, released a statement, um, and that's when President Mearns. Only then was did President Mearns say, okay, maybe I should do something about this. I'll put I'll put campus police out there. I'll send the the policemen out to fix this issue. Um, but yeah, more reactive than proactive is what I'll say.
That's my read on that too. I get that 100%. Um, yeah, have you witnessed or experienced any racism since coming to Ball State?
Um, yeah, um, I have, and this this wasn't this wasn't this wasn't something that was targeting myself specifically, um, but I think, well, for one, the Trump caravan, 100%. Like, there's people out there that were called out, especially in the village. People of color that felt unsafe because these bigoted people would just yell from their pickup trucks, yell racial slurs, harass them. So that's I think that's one sort of like obvious um, point of racism that I've experienced on campus. But something that hit a little closer to home. Um, my friend, he was my roommate freshman year. Still a really good friend of mine. But my freshman year roommate, um, he's Taiwanese, and he's a music major, and so he would spend a lot of time walking back and forth between Sursa and the music building that's by Emmons. And there was one day where he was walking from Emmons to Sursa, like crossing that street, um, and there was a red pickup truck that yelled at him and called him a racial slur, like for no reason at all, like unprovoked. He was just minding his business crossing the street, um, and they just yelled a bunch of Asian slurs his way, um, and that was something that that happened early on, like sophomore year or freshman year. I can't remember the exact date, but that was sort of what um, I guess sort I it was a wake up call for me. Like, oh, there's racism here, and there's still racism in America. Um, so yeah, that's one instance that stands out for me.
That is so hardcore. I can't imagine that. That is really
Yeah,
tough.
it's pretty
That's
shitty.
awful. That's really awful. That's terrible. That just goes to show you how we really have a long way to go before we
Yeah.
can
It's
be an
one thing to read
anti-racist
about it,
country
like read
anymore.
about the case studies like in books, but then once you see it happening to your friends, it's like, man, like you get angry and like um I can't I have to imagine that if you're a person of color or if you're of darker complexion that that stuff happens on a more consistent basis and like um it's probably more common for your friends to have gone through something like that and um yeah, it's probably more personalized for them for sure.
I think it kicked me out for a second. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
you were frozen for a minute. Cool. You're
Uh,
working now though.
yeah, so kind of wrapping this up, we've got about 9 minutes. So kind of wrapping this up, how has this course changed the way that you act or that you think about racism and all of the intersectionality, just all of it?
Um, it made me think of it at a more deeper level, pretty much, because um, I'm I'm willing to bet that 90% of the American population could like answer the following question: Is racism bad? Yes, obviously, but um, in this class we sort of beg the question: How is it bad? Why is it bad? And how has it sort of progressed throughout history? Which are more difficult questions to answer, and they require a more critical look and a critical review of literature, such as the books we've read um, and some of the articles that we've read as well. And if I were to sum it up, I think this class overall has kind of deepened my understanding and sort of forced me to take a look at myself and my own experience. And I think uh, I think that's sort of necessary. I sorry, my voice is getting raspy. I've talked so much. Um, there was this one note that I took from the book. Uh, Let me find it real quick because I think it's very important and a very good takeaway, like from the class as a whole. Um, yeah. At the beginning of Kendi's book on anti-racism, he said, um, "Anti-racism requires consistent self-awareness, self-criticism, and self-examination. Um, you're not permanently labeled as an anti-racist. You're not permanently a racist. It's very much rooted in your daily action and what you do um, on a daily basis. Because anti-racism is um, it's active and it requires consistent, um, just like Kendi said, it requires consistent self-awareness and self-criticism and analysis of different social situations. Um, so that's one way that the class has sort of deepened my understanding. It's made me realize that it's not enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist and take a more active stance. Um, in your daily life and in your relationships at work, at school, um, and just in your family as well.
What active form of anti-racism do you see yourself taking? Just kind of from this class and just in general from your experiences. Like, what way do you think you'll
So you cut out for a little bit there, but I'll try to answer at least like the first part of that question. The way I see myself taking part of it um, actively. So the one of the repeating definitions of anti-racism that we see throughout the book is anti-racism is in place to reduce inequities across the board um, for all races, and um, I sort of see my work with the Asian American Student Association as um, sort of working towards that, because the mission statement behind the Asian American Student Association is to provide a space for Asians and Asian Americans to come together and celebrate their identity, um, feel secure, and I guess uh, having a place to find people with a common background. Um, I think that's very important in creating a culturally diverse and a culturally inclusive place, is to not not come at it from like a PR perspective, but to like provide the space and to pave the way for students to be able to make that space for themselves. So that's my involvement with AASA. I see that as sort of like um, my active uh, element of anti-racism.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great way to combat that. Yeah. Kind of as like a wrap up question, it's like the last question. How have your experience with race shaped the person that you are today?
Um, Good question. I think my understanding of race and just my learning about it has really played a huge role in sort of like my life goals. Um, one of my one of my goals that has formed in recent months is um, I'm kind of like taking, I guess, a risk in doing this, but after college, I'm thinking about just moving to a different country altogether, um, and not really setting myself up or preparing in the future. Just I guess taking um, kind of doing my best to like learn the language, and then um, just shipping off and um, kind of improvising as I go. But the reason I want to do that is because I just based off of my understanding of race, I want to like put myself in a position to understand cultures and points of view that are different from what I was raised on, and um, what I've experienced in my own life. I think I think doing so and doing that sort of uh, I guess enhances your humanity and makes you more human if you're able to incorporate and draw from um, different and diverse human experiences in order to broaden your own understanding. So that's, I guess, how race has shaped my life, in specifically in my life goals.
That's really awesome. Thank you so much for doing this interview. I really enjoyed getting to know your experiences and getting to know you as a person. This has been very good. So that kind of wraps it up. We made it to 59 minutes, so we did pretty good.
Yes, nice. Um, yeah, so I'll to make it easier, I'll stop this recording